Over the last several years, Charlotte has seen tremendous growth in population. You've probably felt that on the interstate, no? Charlotte, Concord, Gastonia, the metro area has surged to nearly 3 million residents. Between 2020 and 2025, we added over 278,000 people, making Charlotte one of the fastest growing metros in the U.S. And I've seen some studies even say we're outpacing Seattle. But church growth, though, is a different story. It's a bit of an inverse relationship where population has grown and multiplied. Church growth has declined significantly, going from almost 60% of the population in 2010 to around 50% in 2020, and that's even lower now. The number of churches that are being planted just cannot keep pace, and overall church growth cannot keep pace with population growth. In Mecklenburg County, 1/3 of families are one-parent home. And this isn't to say that single parents are unable to raise a flourishing child, but often there are more challenges. Statistically speaking, being raised in a single-parent home leads to higher rates of incarceration, lower high school graduation rates, and negative impact on mental health. There's 659 foster care kids in Mecklenburg and Union County. About half of them age out of foster care will have a substance abuse problem. 60% of young men end up incarcerated, and 70% of young women will be pregnant before age 21. Only 32% of kids can read proficiently by grade 3. Children who are not proficient readers by the end of 3rd grade are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. And Charlotte continues to have significant disparities in grade level across race, gender, and income. There's over 288,000 homes, almost a quarter of the homes in the greater Charlotte area that are cost burden, meaning they spend more than 30% of their pre-tax income on housing costs. And that only goes up higher if you rent. That goes up to 43%. There's 1 in 6 people in Charlotte who were born outside of the United States. A series of surveys show that Charlotte consistently scores high in faith community involvement. That's a great way of saying church. We are the city of churches. However, 39th out of 40 in the largest cities of the U.S. in terms of racial and social trust. 1 in 2 schools in Mecklenburg County are segregated by race, and 1 in 3 are segregated by poverty. Charlotte ranks 9th in broken marriages, 10th in human trafficking, and dead last in upward mobility, meaning if a child is born in poverty in Charlotte, it is almost impossible to get out. More than 1 in 7 residents live below the poverty line. 1 in 5 kids live below the poverty line. And the majority of kids in poverty are children of color. And Jesus stood up and read. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoner, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. The Son of Man has come to bear witness, to serve, to bring justice, to evangelize." We love that word, right? "To preach and demonstrate the gospel of the kingdom." That is why he came. In the 1960s and 70s, which is 90% of not this room, but with the rise of TV and broadcasting, the church in the West saw a unique shift from there were local pastors shepherding congregations to more a televangelist approach. So big crusades, conferences, traveling pastors. This is actually a Billy Graham crusade here. And this was fertile ground for the rise of the modern megachurch movement. Or maybe you've heard it called the seeker-friendly church. And the push was to get America saved, to bring the lost in. And look, I don't think that impulse was bad per se, but the anxiety was more on getting people in the crowds and not on discipleship, which inevitably has led to a crisis of discipleship. And I would argue a lot of what we're seeing in the modern kind of deconstruction, evangelical movement is a outcry. It is a pain from really poor discipleship. A total misunderstanding of what it even means to be a Christian. Because the emphasis was put more on going to heaven when you die, which is not what the scriptures teach, rather than bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, meaning what I do with my life matters, how I care about others matter, how I care about the earth matters. And I would argue, listen, the crisis of discipleship is the reason for the state of our city. Cue the Willard quote that I just come back to time and time again. The greatest issue facing the world today. Let that sink in. The greatest issue with all its heartbreaking needs is not progressive ideology or the LGBTQ community or secularism or crystals or on the other side, MAGA or Donald Trump. It's not human trafficking. It's not broken marriages. It's not injustice or oppressive systems. And hear me, all of those things need to be addressed. They matter, but for Willard, they are symptoms of a much larger sickness. No, the greatest issue facing Charlotte is whether those who say they are Christians will become disciples, students, apprentices, practitioners of Jesus Christ, steadily learning from him how to live the life of the kingdom into every corner of our city. In my experience, having grown up in the shadow of the seeker-friendly movement, the model of church that was handed to me, for instance, led to a bit of a plateau. Once my apprenticeship to Jesus started to touch on deeper issues of my shadow side, like my anger, my perfectionism, my critical spirit, my anxiety, attachments, all of those habits of sin that go back generations in my family line. At that point in my journey, the formula of Christian life that I grew up with, go to church, read your Bible every morning, tithe, again, all good things. We believe in all of those, but it wasn't working on the deeper layers. Instead of making progress, I felt like I was regressing. Instead of becoming more like Jesus, more loving, joyful, peaceful, I was becoming less like him, more irritable, impatient, exhausted. Is that anyone else's experience? Just your pastor. Cool. All right. The problem was not that I did not want to become like Jesus or that I wasn't trying to become like him. If anything, I was. The problem was I did not know how to become like him. And after serving as a pastor for over 10 years, I've come to realize many people reach a point in their journey where they get stuck in self-defeating habits of sin and shame. You might feel like you're in that now. Stuck in dysfunctional patterns that go back generations or hurt and wounding. And the model of church handed to me just did not teach me how to become like Jesus. So the formation movement of the 1970s started as a counterbalance to the rise of megachurch and seeker-sensitive movement that was a bit of a loving response to the bankruptcy of discipleship and shallow spirituality. Wave one was books. You may have heard of some of these. Richard Foster, who wrote Celebration of Discipline. Dallas Willard, after that, who wrote The Spirit of the Disciplines. These two books arguably kind of sparked an entire movement that was aimed at bringing people from like the church tradition I grew up in to kind of an ancient kind of stream of the church that had been lost over time. Wave two, nonprofits were started to kind of gather people around these books. For example, the Transforming Center with Ruth Haley Barton in the early 90s and many more. And they were all outside of the local church, though. That's not a critique, that's just a statement. They were run either at a retreat center or a seminary, but not in the local church. Wave three, churches got wind of that, so they started calling a pastor a discipleship pastor. This was me, by the way. Some people asked me what my beard looked like in COVID. There it is. And in my case, I was the young adults, high school, college, social media, evangelism, small groups, discipleship, local outreach, and global missions pastor who also played the drums. That was wave 3. It was very much on the periphery, but it was not central to the identity of the church. Let's hire somebody to teach the church how to do this kind of on the side, not reorient an entire church around that. Do we need to get past that picture? Okay. So wave 4 has not happened yet. Wave 4 is where a church orients its entire identity around the way of Jesus. And there are some, by no means, I'm not creating an elitist mentality, but at large in American evangelicalism, it is not the case. Willard on his deathbed said, if this movement does not get into the life of the local church, it will be nothing more than a passing fad. And it certainly has become that. For many, it has been grossly mischaracterized or misunderstood as, quote, being into formation, which really just means you read Dallas Willard, you're probably introverted, like white sad boy. That's kind of what formation means. When we were planting Eden, because we were wanting to organize a church around a rule of life, and we were deeply shaped by some of these writers, we were actually accused of starting a church with just a bunch of navel gazers. If you don't know what that means, Google Gemini says it's the act of engaging in excessive, pointless, self-indulgent introspection. It refers to getting so absorbed in your own thoughts, feelings, and problems you fail to take action and lose awareness of the outside world, which is a really kind thing to say to a young church planner. But part of this fear, because the formation movement was more or less a reaction to kind of the megachurch, it was looking to recover ancient practices like silence, solitude, contemplative prayer. The assumption is if you start a church around these things, you are no different than a modern-day wellness program, and you've reduced Jesus to a bit of a self-help guru. But here's the deal. The call to spiritual formation or discipleship is a call to die, to take up your cross. Robert Mullholland put it this way: spiritual formation is becoming like Jesus for the sake of others. Spiritual maturity is not measured by how much we know, but how we love others. The invitation of a life of apprentice to Jesus is, as he would define it, to be with him, to become like him, and then to do the things that he did. I have come to proclaim good news to the poor, he said. I've come to proclaim freedom to the prisoner, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. That's what he came to do. And to be clear, spiritual formation, you may not have heard of that term, and that's fine. It's not a Christian thing. It is a human one. Every minute of every day, you are being formed by something. You're being formed by your habits, like the first thing you touch is your iPhone. You're being formed by the relationships that you surround yourself with. You're being formed by the stories, the narrative scripts that were passed down to you, the stories that you believe to make sense of reality. And your environment, and all of that happens over time. And listen, that is totally unintentional, meaning it just happens when you wake up, whether you know it or not. You are being formed. The question is, how are you being formed? So to be formed in the image of Jesus takes intentionality. He said in Luke 6, the apprentice is not above the rabbi, but everyone who is fully trained, interesting, will be like their rabbi. So it's not only Jesus' desire for his apprentices or his students or disciples to become like him, but he's got a training program for us that we can follow. But to enroll in that program requires a whole new level of intentionality. It requires counter formation. It requires intentional spiritual formation. So to counteract the stories that we've bought into to make sense of reality, we need the teaching of Jesus. To counteract the relationships that are malforming our soul, we need community that is closer than blood. To counteract those bad habits, we need practices of the way of Jesus. And all of that, the Spirit of God uses to make us more like him. And here's the deal. You do play a part in your own formation. You do. The Spirit, he said that he who began a good work in you, he'll bring it to completion. But Paul also said, keep in step with the Spirit. That's a command. Abide in the vine. That's a command. So partnership over time. We cannot transform ourselves. Deep change is God's work. And I love in Scripture, the Spirit is likened to a rushing river. It's like a current. And the invitation is to get yourself in that current and to let him carry you places you could never possibly imagine. To partner with him to put the world to rights, to seek the renewal of a city, to do what Jesus did. And what did he do? He came to proclaim good news to the poor, to set the prisoner free. Do we remember Jesus' invitation in Matthew 4? He said, come, follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. A lot of people think fish for people is a pun. It's not. This is a first century turn of phrase for a great rabbi. Because brilliant rabbis had the ability to capture your mind and heart with their teaching. And so Jesus is saying, come follow me, and I will train you to do what I do. We've used this illustration before. If you're an apprentice to a plumber, at the end of your apprenticeship program, your goal of plumbing is what? Is it to know about plumbing, or is it to be able to plumb a house? The latter. In the same way, the goal of apprenticeship to Jesus, and this might really stub on a toe, it's not to fill your week with Bible studies. It's to do the kinds of things that he did. What did he do? I'm so glad that you asked. He preached. He stood up against political and religious corruption. He served. He healed. He prophesied. He delivered people from demons. Yep. And you can see in the life of Jesus this rhythm and cadence. He would retreat to what the Greek calls the eremos, or the quiet place, and then he would return to serve others. He would retreat into a practice of solitude, and he would return to community. There was this inhale and this exhale in his life. The way of Jesus is not introverted wellness, but he also did not give out of something he did not have. This is a pitfall, I believe, in the model of church that was handed to me. Just do stuff for Jesus, amen? I did, but I was still a toxic person. He did not do the things that he did out of a place of emptiness, but of fullness. So formation of the inner life is just as important as the outer one. You cannot, and listen, you cannot love people from a place of unhealth. And I would argue, you cannot obey the great commandment to love others if you do not know how to love yourself correctly. To let the Spirit work on the deeper parts of your inner life. And in doing so, and this is where I push back of us being a bunch of navel gazers, in regular rhythms of retreating to be with him, you are able to do the things he did from a place of wholeness, to retreat and return. So I give you that context. For some of you, that was a reminder. For a lot of you, that may have been new, but to share again the process of apprenticeship. It's to be with him, to become like him, to do as he did. Because we as a church are about to start a pretty long journey on two of our practices from our shared rule of life, from our shared way of life, that really do embody what Jesus came to do. It is both witness and service. Or put another way, justice and evangelism. Or put another way, preaching and demonstrating the gospel. Because you cannot preach the gospel without demonstrating the gospel. That is unkind. But you cannot demonstrate the gospel without preaching the gospel. That is unloving. This is where our formation turns outward. So, a roadmap over the next several weeks. We are going to be working through 12 different topics. We're going to start in the practice of witness. What does the Bible say about witness and service? Then we'll spend some weeks on witness. We'll spend some weeks on service. And then there is a book called Neighborliness that is going to bridge the two practices there. It's written by the president of IMN. His name is David Dukeson. The IMN is the network that we're a part of, but he wrote a brilliant book on loving like Jesus across dividing lines. So for in here, there'll be teaching on witness and service, and then what we call bands. That is where your accountability to the practices. There will be, so for some of you, I may never see you again, and that's okay. You can check out for the next 3 minutes if you want. Cool. So for everybody that is in a band, what I do want to encourage you for the practices that we're going to be doing, we're going to try something a little bit different with our bands. Thomas, you can go back to the last one. I just want to show you our website on how to get there. One more. So go up here, you click that, and then this screen will open, which is the next one. So go to teaching, and then you'll click teaching, and that screen will come up, and then it'll be right here. This is where you will find, if you're in a band, this is where you'll find teaching, and then also what we are doing called banding guides. We want to just walk through these practices very intentionally. You're still going to confess sin. I know that's your favorite thing to do. You're still going to bare your soul, but you are also going to walk through in a bit of a more structured way around the witness and service practices. Okay, I'm done. So what we're going to do now, every week we do a community conversation. You, by no means, if you are new, you do not have to stay for this, okay? You are invited to. I would love to hear your thoughts, even if I don't ever see you again in this life. But we would love to just walk through these questions. We'll do that in groups of 5 or 6. But again, you are welcome to leave. There is no judgment if you go. Everything we do is invitational. But if you're staying, here are the questions to orient where we are actually at with these practices. If you're leaving, we bless you. Go in peace. Everyone else, grab groups of 3 to 5, and then we will carry on.